2006 Acura MDX, front brake pads and machined rotors. I'm Brian Essex from Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the process of doing that. So we're going to get started by getting the front of the vehicle up in the air. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and go ahead and remove your front wheel. The next step is to remove the 14mm bolt here and the 14mm bolt here. So you're going to take your caliper off after you get the bolts and set it up on the suspension. And you can go ahead and inspect your boots, make sure they're not torn or leaking any fluids or anything like that. And then what we need to do is get this bracket off. So on the back side, this can be a 19mm bolt here and a 19mm bolt here. We're going to go ahead and remove those two. The easiest way to do it is with an impact gun, but you can definitely get a ratchet and a socket in there. A little tougher, but... So after getting your bracket off, we need to measure the rotor and make sure it's thick enough. So you're going to measure it with a micrometer like this. And then sometimes they're stamped on there, but like you can see, this is really got a lot of surface rust on it, so I'm not going to be able to read it. But you can look it up in a book called the Bindex Brake Book, or you can look it up online for the specs. So you want to make sure that this spec is larger than the measurement is larger than the lowest spec in the book. And if your rotor is in good shape and machinable, you want to make sure that it doesn't have hot spots. And hot spots kind of look like leopard patterns. So if you see like these little blue marks on your rotors and stuff, you recommend replacing them. Or if you look at the metal real finely, you'll see small cracks. You don't want to machine that either. You want to replace the rotors. So after determining your rotors are machinable, you need to take out these set screws here. And if they're rusty in any way, I recommend spraying some penetrating oil on these. And pretty much the only way to get these out is you're going to need an impact screwdriver. So it's going to look like this. So you put it in the bit, and you'll strike the end of this with a hammer and rotate it counterclockwise at the same time, and that should drive them out. Now that you got the set screws off out of the rotor is most likely still going to be stuck to the hub. So it has threaded holes here, and that's an 8x125. So you take an 8x125 bolt and screw it in there, and you can take a setup something like this and screw it in. And then it'll pop the rotor free. So it'll pop the rotor free like that, and now you can remove it. And it also has it on both sides, so if it's really hard, you can put 2 bolts, and you can do a little bit on this side, a little bit on this side, and kind of pull it out straight. Now before I check this up, my rotor has a little bit of surface rust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tool like this, an angle grinder with a Scotch-Brite pad on it, and kind of just lightly buff the rust off, and that'll help it seat flat and perfect. And then if you guys don't have access to a brake lathe, recommend you take it down to a auto repair shop and tell them what year, make, model it is. They can measure it for you if you don't have the mic. And they can measure for you, and they can machine it for you. So after you machine your rotor, check it up. You're going to run the bits in and just do a light little thin cut on it. And I would show you how it's done, but everybody's brake lathe is different and works differently. This one here happens to be like 40 years old, but it still works great. So go ahead and do a light cut on your rotors, and then after that we'll reassemble the. So now that our rotors are machining, we need to prep our brake pads and all of our hardware here. So the first step to do is just remove so whatever side you're working on. So I like to do one side at a time, because the pads are slightly different from left to right according to the little squealer thing. So what I like to do is this is the inner pad where the pistons are. So you match up your one. And so if yours doesn't come with your shims, so you need to take the old ones off and put them back on. If they're in bad shape, then I recommend getting a new set of them. And so we're going to do the same for the outer pad here. Just kind of set it aside. The outer pad are the same on left and right, so you just make sure if yours new ones don't come with the shim, put it on there or transfer it over. Next is the hardware here on the brake caliper itself. Sometimes they come with them like this, and sometimes they don't. If they don't, then you need to take a wire brush, kind of like this one here, and then scrub the channels out and make sure that they're in good shape, and make sure they're not pitted or bent or damaged anyway. If they are, order a kit of these and replace it. And so what we need to do is just take these and pop them off with our fingers, like so, and then get the matching one here and then just press it on. Next we need to remove these, we need to push these little bushings back and pull the pins out. And put a fresh layer of grease on them and clean these up, and then put them back in the boots and work the grease, the new grease inside the pins here. And the top and bottom ones are different, so I recommend doing them both one at a time. So pull one out, wipe off the old grease, put a little fresh layer of grease on it. And the grease I'm referring to is called moly grease. Sometimes the brake pads come with a little bit of it in a little pack like that, or you can get what we call seal glide, which is specially designed brake grease. You can get it at your parts store, and you can get a little small tub of this. You don't need the giant bucket like this. So you're going to put a fresh layer of that grease on these pins and work it back into place. And then also what we're going to do before we put it back together is we're going to take a fresh little bit of that grease and just put a little dab on the back of the shims here, and kind of just small amount. We don't need a lot, and then kind of work it in with your finger. And you want to be careful not to get it on the front side, just on the back of the shims, and this helps reduce squeaking. Now you go ahead and put your rotor on and put your set screws back in. We're going to put the caliper bracket on, but before we do, on the bolts, what I do is I put a little of this thread sealer, blue thread sealer on the threads like this, and that helps reduce the bolts from vibrating loose and backing back out. They don't have lock washers, so this is a little added protection. So now what you can do is you just put your caliper bracket. Now that the bracket's back on, you're going to start the bolts and torque them down to 101 foot-pounds. Now you can go ahead and slip your inner and outer brake pads on. Make sure that your inner one has the little but the squealer on it. Make sure you match it up with the original one you took out. And go ahead and install them. And just slide them into the little grooves at the bottom, and then rotate the top in. And you may have to push right here on the shim a little bit. Kind of flare it with your thumb to get the pads to go in. Next we need to put these little springs that go in here, and they just mount in the holes that are on the end of the pads, kind of like this. You're going to have to squeeze them together so they go in here, and then you'll squeeze it together. But before we do that, we need to prep our caliper. And the reason why is if we put these on now, they'll just try to spring the pads off. So we need to prep the caliper first. So we need to press these pistons back into the bore. And before we do that, we need to lower the vehicle down and remove a couple ounces of brake fluid. And the reason why is when I do this, I'm not going to open the bleeder screw. I'm going to leave it closed, and I'm going to press these pistons in, and that's going to push the fluid back into the master cylinder, and if it's too full, it'll overflow and spill into the bay. And after we're done, we're going to pump the brake pedal, and that's going to pump the fluid back into the caliper, and we'll have a nice firm pedal, and we won't have to bleed the brake system. But I always like to throw this out there. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, or if the pedal feels spongy after you're done with the job, I recommend bleeding the system. So we need to remove the cap and suck a few ounces of brake fluid out of the master cylinder. And then after we're done, we're going to pump our brake pedal and make sure that we got a good firm pedal, and if we do, we won't have to bleed the brake system. And after we're all done, we're going to double check our fluid level, make sure it's full and topped off. So this tool looks like kind of like a caulking gun, and it goes in there between the pad, and you just put an old pad in there, and you just squeeze the handle until it pushes the piston all the way in. And when you're doing it, you want to make sure that the brake hose is not twisted. If it's twisted, it'll make it harder to push the pistons back in. Now that the pistons are pushed in, we can go ahead and put these springs on the pad, and then we're going to take the caliper and put the caliper on and torque it down to 27 foot-pounds. The two bolts on the top and the bottom. 27 foot-pounds. And when you put these brake calipers on, you want to be careful not to twist the lines. You want to make sure the line is nice and straight. If it's twisted, when you turn the wheel left or right, it'll kink it, and it'll create hydraulic problems. So make sure the line is not pinched off or twisted when you do this. And go ahead and tighten those bolts back down, top and bottom, to 27 foot-pounds. After that, you're going to put your wheel on and torque the wheel down, lower the vehicle, and you're going to pump the brake pedal 6 or 7 times to get that fluid back into the calipers like I was explaining. And that'll complete the brake service on a 2006 Acura MDX. I'm Brian Nessa from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos and encourage you to subscribe. Thank you again.